It is my great honor to introduce to you our 57th president of APSA, Dean Andrea Hayes Dixon. A trailblazer is defined as someone who is a pioneer, an innovator, or a leader who is the first to do something, creating new paths, methods, or ideas for others to follow. Dr. Hayes Dixon embodies all of these attributes and so much more. Dean Hayes Dixon's guiding philosophy is that excellence of performance will outweigh any artificial barrier created by man. And this is a philosophy by which she has lived her life day in and day out. She was born and raised in Hollywood, California, by her parents Delia and Luther Hayes. Her dad was her first love, as she says, her biggest cheerleader, always positive and supportive. She is pictured here with her dad at her high school ball. She attended Beverly Hills High, where she was a member of the drill team. Her mom was a powerful influence in her life, a Los Angeles high school principal who is pictured here with Andrea when her mother received her master's degree in education later in life. Her parents met in college at USC and were married 55 years before her dad's passing a few years ago. After high school, Dr. Hayes Dixon moved across the country to attend Dartmouth University as a religion major with pre-med track and ultimately graduated from medical school at Dartmouth in 1991. She studied hard, but she also found time to work as a model, seen here as a still window model, and compete in the occasional beauty pageant where she was crowned Miss Hanover and then second runner-up for Miss New Hampshire later that year. During medical school, she also worked in a leukemia lab, which solidified her interest in oncology. Little did she know then that she would have such an enormous impact in the lives of children with cancer in her future. She completed her general surgery residency at UC Davis, Oakland, as the first Black female to graduate from the program. This is the first of many firsts. During her residency, she also completed a fellowship in microbiology at UCSF. In her quest to become a pediatric surgical oncologist, she completed fellowships in melanoma and sarcoma at MD Anderson and pediatric surgical oncology at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. After several attempts, she ultimately matched into pediatric surgery at the Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto. When she expressed concern to her mom that she'd be 36 and still training, her mom boldly said, "You'll be 36 anyway, keep going." And that is exactly what she did. During her surgical training, she remained a devoted mother and wife. She navigated intense surgical training with 2 children, proving that professional excellence and family are not mutually exclusive. She's pictured here with her 2 children, Janelle and Jonah Jordan, who are with her here today in the audience. In 2004, Dr. Hayes Dixon became the first Black female who was board certified in pediatric surgery in the United States. This is a historic This is really a historic milestone for our profession. After 2 years at Children's National in DC, Dr. Hayes Dixon moved with her young family across the country to Houston, where at MD Anderson, she would spend the next 14 years building a program of excellence in pediatric surgical oncology and HIPEC. It is during this time that I got to know Andrea not only as an outstanding pediatric surgeon, but as a kind, compassionate, and humble partner who would do anything for those in need, especially her patients. In 2006, Dr. Hayes Dixon performed the first cytoreductive surgery and hyperthermic intraperitoneal chemotherapy, HIPEC, in a child worldwide. She soon became known as an international expert in sarcoma and HIPEC in children. During her years at UT, it wasn't all work. There was lots of fun to be had, as well as an occasional glass of wine. She's pictured here with many of our UT partners. We couldn't keep her forever, as she was destined to accomplish much more. In 2018, she became the division chief and chief of surgery at North Carolina Children's Hospital. And then in 2022, another first. Dr. Andrea Hayes Dixon became the first Black woman to become dean and the first female chair of surgery at Howard University College of Medicine, where she also serves as Senior Vice President of Health Affairs and Associate Director of the Cancer Center. To say Dr. Hayes Dixon has been productive is an understatement. She is currently the PI for several investigator-initiated clinical trials with more than $15 million in industry funding. She has published more than 200 peer-reviewed articles and 11 book chapters. She was recently the editor of the latest edition of Saveston and currently serves as the section editor for pediatrics for the Annals of Surgical Oncology and on the editorial boards of the Annals of Surgery and JACS. She has been an invited lecturer and visiting professor, honestly, too many times to count. I'm sure many of you have hosted her at your institutions. Throughout her career, Dr. Hayes Dixon has served on numerous national committees and in influential leadership roles, including the American Board of Surgery and the ACS Board of Regents. Most recently, she was appointed by the President to serve on the National Cancer Advisory Board as one of 6 members who make the decisions regarding funding priorities for the NCI. In addition, she was recently appointed chair of the Scientific Management Review Board at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Last year, she received the highest honor in medicine, induction into the National Academy of Science, alongside APSA President-elect Dr. Gail Besner. In 2020, Dr. Hayes Dixon met her person, Hugh Nichols Dixon, and they were married on August 27, 2022. In preparing for this introduction, Hugh was kind enough to give me his time, his thoughts, and many of these wonderful photos, and he is beside her today. Dr. Hayes Dixon is pictured here with her husband, Hugh, children Janelle and Jonah, and sister-in-law, Shuggy. Jonah's wife, Sadie, is also here today, so welcome to all of you. Hugh helped me capture in words the traits embodied by our president. Dean Hayes Dixon is a person with exceptionally high intellect, which she has applied to every opportunity and challenge in her life. She is exquisitely stylish and poised, but most importantly, she has extremely high ethical standards and is always committed to doing the right thing. While Dr. Hayes Dixon has worn many hats in her career, her patients have always been her top priority. And for that reason, I want to close with a couple of very special messages from 2 of her former HIPEC patients and their families. Mason was diagnosed with DSRCT as a teenager. He says of Dr. Hayes Dixon, "After my surgery, I have never felt such professionalism wrapped in a cool, calm, and compassionate human being." He had almost 200 nodules removed from his abdomen, followed by HIPEC. He went on to receive a doctorate in acupuncture and has just dedicated his life to helping others with serious medical conditions. Griffin was diagnosed with DRCT at the age of 10, and his parents were told that his condition was terminal. Through a Google search, his mom found Dr. Hayes Dixon and reached out. Griffin and his family traveled to Houston, where Dr. Hayes Dixon performed cytoreductive surgery and HIPEC. He's now 21. He's living his best life in college as a sophomore. His mom writes, "There are no words to describe how thankful we are to Dr. Hayes Dixon and how much she means to us." So with that, it is my genuine pleasure to welcome Dean Andrea Hayes Dixon to the podium as our 57th president of the American Pediatric Surgical Association. Thank you.
Wow. That was wonderful, Mary. Thank you. I got up here and I said, I'm not going to cry like all the other presidents. I'm not going to do it. But it was just touching to hear from those patients of mine, and thank you so much for that extremely kind introduction. I want to share with you today a lot of my journey in getting here. I feel that being the president of the American Pediatric Surgical Association is a capstone in my career. And I want to share with the younger people in the audience what is becoming very rare, which is a surgical scientist and being able to focus on one thing that you love. I first want to, let's see, where's the clicker? I'm going to frame my talk by talking first about who built me, what I have built in my career, and finish off with what I have built in the last year as your APSA president. Family is always first. I serve a wonderful God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and they guide my family, and they have strengthened me throughout all of my years. You heard a little bit from Mary about my family, and here is a picture of my family at my mom and dad's 50th wedding anniversary celebration. And you can see this is my sister here. She's, there, yeah, the pointer's working great. So this is my sister. She's an attorney in Los Angeles. This is my brother, who was a mechanic and has passed away. My grandmother and both of my parents. These are my mother's parents, Otis and Etta Williams, and this was at their 50th wedding anniversary. And my grandmother was a teacher in the Los Angeles School District, where she taught special ed children before there were diagnoses such as autism and the spectrum, and she did that for 40 years. My grandfather was a professor, a math professor at Long Beach City College, and stayed there for his entire career as well. My mother was a teacher in the Los Angeles Unified School District who became an associate principal and then a principal. And then my father was a counselor for Los Angeles City College. And so my entire life, education was emphasized. I'm not surprised that I am in a teaching academic profession as a pediatric surgeon, because I was raised to teach, I was raised to innovate, I was raised to leave the world better than I found it, as my father told me very, very often. And as Mary mentioned, age was not a factor. This is my mother in a recent photo as 86 years old, and my grandmother at 103 years old before she passed away at 105. And they have both strengthened me in becoming who I am today. And as Mary mentioned, that conversation that happened with my mother was when I had not matched the first time in pediatric surgery. I hadn't matched the second year in pediatric surgery, and I was wondering if I was ever going to become a pediatric surgeon. And I said, well, maybe I'll just be a general surgeon, and either way, if I'm a pediatric surgeon, I might be 36 before I finish. And she said, just keep going, you're gonna be 36 anyway. She's always encouraged me to be even better than I thought I could be, and I'm very thankful and grateful for that. These are my wonderful children, Janelle and Jonah, who are sitting here in the front row. This is when they were 4 and 5 years old. They're 13 months apart. Both of them were birthed during my molecular biology fellowship in the lab at UC San Francisco, and here they are on the right about a year ago. I'm the shortest one. They're 6'2" and 6'6", respectively. So, and they came out normal. I was worried when I was on call every third night and every fifth night and never at home and going to conferences. But despite the fact that their mother was there only part of the time, they came out as normal children, and I'm very grateful for both of them. This is the love of my life. Hugh Dixon, you have made me whole. You have given me happiness beyond belief, and you support me every day. Thank you. I can't thank you enough. This is my new family that Hugh brought. So here are his lovely 5 children and their significant others. And here is my other new family member, my wonderful daughter-in-law, Sadie, who's also here today. When I say I get a little help from my friends, I have lots of friends, and this photo was taken at the American College of Surgeons meeting, and we were trying to take a picture of all the pediatric surgeons that were there, and it just happened to be all the people in my life who have impacted me in many ways in pediatric surgery. First and foremost is Dr. Catherine Anderson, the first female president of the American Pediatric Surgical Association. She couldn't be here, but she has encouraged me since the time that she was president. I remember approaching her and congratulating her during her presidency, and she said to me, do you want to be president of APSA one day? And I was thinking at that time, I just want to be in APSA. Like, that was just I don't want to be president. But she has encouraged me every step of the way, and she says, I'm going to nominate you, and I'm going to keep nominating you, and you're going to get there. So I have to thank Dr. Anderson. Dr. Henry Ford, you were one of the first people I met at an APSA meeting, and I appreciate all your guidance and all of your direction. I think that you can feel a little bit lost when you walk into an organization and you don't see many people who look like you, and Henri provided that stability and support. Dr. Fallett has been what I call my quiet supporter. She's always in my corner, encouraging me at the times that I need to be encouraged and giving me all the strength that I need to keep going. And she's a quiet individual, but have followed her in a lot of positions and have known how organized she is, and she always inspires me. Dr. Diana Farmer, I'll talk a little bit about later because she has really strengthened me in every way. Dr. Don Nakayama was my partner at UNC, and he wrote a book that many of you may have read on the history of pediatric surgery, and he highlighted me with lots of embarrassing photos in that book if you want to go find those. Danielle Walsh was my first fellow as an attending, so I was attending, took my first job at Children's in DC, and she was the first fellow, and you know, as you know, that your first year in practice is your hardest year of fellowship. And so she and I were in the trenches together, and she was a great support. And Dr. Marion Henry, who was the program chair last year when I became president of APSA. I can't talk about my journey without talking about some of the things that have shaped me as an African-American female surgeon. These are the quotations that I've heard through the years that can be hurtful if you let them, but, excuse me. But these are the words that I've heard, but it didn't deter me at all. It, in fact, made me even more determined to be better than I thought I could be. And Dr. Charles Drew said those words, excellence of performance will transcend any artificial barriers created by man. And he not only was the developer and innovator for the blood banking system, but is also a symbol for the Society of Black Academic Surgeons and was the chair of surgery at Howard University for 10 years prior to his death. I see his picture every day when I walk to my office at Howard, and it's a very impactful image to remember that excellence is what we all need to achieve. This is Dr. Claude Organ Jr. He was the second African-American male president of the American College of Surgeons and president of the American Board of Surgery. And he guided me significantly as the chair of surgery when I was a resident. And one of the things he said to me after I didn't do so well on the first year of the ABSITE exam, and I went to his office, and this was in the bad old days of 100 and 120-hour work week, so I felt just showing up for work should have been good enough. He brought me in his office. He says, oh, you didn't do so well on this exam. And I said, yes, sir. He said, well, because there was only 3 answers. Yes, sir. No, sir. Right away, sir. That was it. There were no other potential answers. And he said, well, you know, what do you think? You think you're not a good test taker? Some people say that they're poor test takers. I said, I don't know what the problem was. And he said, well, I have some advice for you. You don't have to worry about how to take the test if you know all the answers. Next year, know all the answers. So that's exactly what I did. And I did much better the next year. This is my graduating class of residency. There were 2 women in our class of 8 residents, and all of them I still keep in touch with. It was really an impactful experience to have Dr. Organ, one of the greats in surgery, who was went through the pyramid program at Creighton and stayed on at Creighton as the chair of surgery before going to Oakland, California. Really was an astounding man. He was also the editor of what is now JAMA Surgery, which was the Archives of Surgery for years, and really was a phenomenal role model. And I don't think that he knew that I was going to be the first Black female pediatric surgeon, but interestingly, he sent me on this road to interview an individual called Dr. Huena Gauntlet. Huena Gauntlet is the first Black female surgeon in the United States who's board certified. She was in solo practice at Kaiser for her entire career, laid low, wasn't in any societies, but was the first. And he sent me to her house one day when I was an intern. He said, I want you to drive up there, I want you to interview her and write an article. And it was a wonderful opportunity to meet this wonderful woman who had twin boys and loved orchids, and really, for me, I wasn't really sure why I was there, but I think he knew why he sent me, because he knew I wanted to be a pediatric surgeon. This is my first publication, Huena Gauntlet, A Profile in Courage. It was published in the National Medical Association Journal. And I have to give one more example of sponsorship that Dr. Organ had for me, and that sponsorship was when he took me to an American College of Surgeons meeting to the Society of Surgical Chairs reception. I didn't know that's what it was at the time. I was just finishing I was in my second year of residency, and he said, I wanted you to meet all of the Department of Surgical Chairs. Now, everyone I met was a name on a textbook, and I was in awe of all these surgical giants in one room. I was the only resident in the room. He brought me and introduced me to every single one of the surgical chairs in the United States who were there, and told them, she's a real deal, she's gonna be great. He kept saying that over and over. We finished the reception and we're walking out, and he said, I just want you to know that these men have feet of clay. There was not one woman in the room. He said, these men have feet of clay, and you can do the same thing that they're doing. And at the time, I said, I just want to be board certified. Like, I don't, this whole chair thing was just not for me, but he really, that's what sponsorship is, taking around an individual and really supporting them. This is Dr. DeBoss, who helped me at UCSF, taught me how to do my first abstract presentation. He was the chair of surgery at UCSF at the time, and showed me how to do my first oral presentation. And he connected with Dr. Organ, who helped me in the laboratories at the University of California, San Francisco, getting my molecular biology fellowship. This is Dr. Langer, who later this afternoon will be delivering our Grossfeld lecture. This Dr. Langer is the one who trained me in pediatric surgery. He started as the chair of pediatric surgery in Toronto at the Hospital for Sick Children. That was the third year in a row that I didn't match. And he interviewed me and said, we'll take you in one of the outside of the match positions that's usually reserved for a Canadian, that they didn't have any available candidates that year. I'm very thankful I had an outstanding experience in Canada and training in an outstanding institution, and I'll always be grateful for you, Dr. Langer, and giving me that opportunity and continuing to be my mentor throughout the years. Dr. Diana Farmer, great mentors, they don't give you the answers, they just make you ask those important questions. They support you and reflect your words back to you so that you can be confident in the decisions that you have already made. That's what Dr. Farmer has done for me, so thank you so much, Diana. Dr. Stephen Shockett was the chair of surgery at St. Jude for many years. And I met him when I was a medical student and doing a rotation at Stanford. He was the chair of pediatric surgery there. And it was there I fell in love with pediatric surgical oncology. And he showed me what excellence in the operating room was like in a baby with large tumors in a small body. And he wrote all the letters of recommendation and made the phone calls for 2 years in a row while I was a fellow at St. Jude to get me that position. It's also important to mention St. Jude because that's where I met my first patient with this rare disease, desmoplastic small round cell tumor. We opened the patient, there was hundreds of tumors everywhere. I went to tell the mother that her 12-year-old boy was gonna die. And I said, I never want this feeling again. I'm gonna figure this tumor out. I'm gonna understand it. I'm gonna make sure I don't ever have to have that conversation again. And so that was very impactful when I met that in 1998, I met that first patient of mine. And I got to UT Houston and MD Anderson Cancer Center, where I had to get a grant. I had a molecular biology lab. And this is Dr. Levi Watkins, who was the first African-American surgeon at Johns Hopkins. He was my mentor for my Robert Wood Johnson grant and a pioneer in the AICD device. He was the one that told me when I was presenting to him my lab data, you're not just a diamond in the rough, you're a diamond. And those positive words go a long way, and it's really important to have people in your career that can give you those positive words. So then after meeting that patient at St. Jude, I went on and said, okay, what do we know about this tumor? So I went to the library to look at microfiche. Probably 2 of you in the audience know what microfiche is. And there were 2 articles on this very rare tumor, and I said, I'm going to figure out why these children are all dying. And you see the Kaplan-Meier curve on the right, which demonstrates only a 10% survival in these patients over a 5-year period. And so I was determined to figure out, if all these kids were dying of this disease, how can we make a difference? And I went to talk to my pediatric surgical colleagues, and they said, you're crazy, you're gonna pour hot chemotherapy in a child's abdomen, that's nuts, don't do it. I went to my adult surgical colleagues, they said, you're crazy, you can't pour hot chemotherapy in the abdomen of a child. But these 2 individuals encouraged me. This is Dr. Richard Alexander, who's a HIPEC surgeon in the NIH, and I went to him, he gave me his phase 1 trial. I used that to write my own phase 1 trial. And Dr. Paul Sugarbaker, who's arguably the father of HIPEC, has done the most HIPECs in the world. I went to watch him operate. He gave me tips and tricks, and then was encouraging me to do the first child with HIPEC. He did later on, when I presented my first 5 patients at a national meeting, stand up in the back and said, Andrea, I thought you'd never do it, even though he was quite positive at the time. So that was really important for the young people in the audience to understand that a career path happens in the background of what you see at an annual meeting. One abstract presented is one very small piece of the puzzle that one is trying to put together. This presidency is a combination of 29 years of work being supported by my friends in the American College of Surgeons, American Board of Surgery, and other areas. I needed to understand how to make the impossible possible, how I would resect hundreds or thousands of tumors that I was told were unresectable. How was I going to build my career on this passion, and how was I going to successfully heal and provide pain relief for these children? I decided to focus on one disease, one ailment that I could possibly move the needle to change, and I chose a rare cancer. This is an image of one of my early patients where you can see multiple abdominal metastases in the ascites floating in the liver here. And this is a 5-year-old boy who presented and was on one of the patients on my clinical trials. We were able to get a complete cytoreduction in him, and this is his post-operative CT scan that shows no evidence of disease. And he went on to Georgetown University, and I lost track of him after his mother sent me a note saying that he got into Georgetown. This is an 8-year-old boy. You see about 3 or 4 tumors here. Same disease, so it's kind of an odd disease because sometimes it has small tumors, sometimes they're large. Here's a 13-year-old male that has a thick amount of tumor on the right diaphragm and left diaphragm, and then some retroperitoneal tumor right here. And he thought he had a surfing accident and came in this way, and he was able to successfully get the procedure. But I had to teach myself this operation, and this is one of the cases that really presented me with a challenge early on. This is one of my first 10 cases. And this is you can see here that there's a large tumor wedged between the bladder and the rectum, and then there's a tumor on the right diaphragm. I'm going to show you some images of this patient, and this tumor here, I actually resected and left the bladder and rectum intact. And that's important because at the time, what had prevented this disease from being resectable is people had looked in the pelvis. You sort of put your hand in there, you feel like it's firm and it's socked in and you can't dissect it. And I said to myself, I got to figure this out, and I don't want to take out this child's or this adolescent's bladder and rectum. And so I learned how to do this meticulous dissection technique that I'll show you a few pictures of. So this is the pelvis of a patient. The feet are at the top of the screen, the head's at the bottom of the screen. This is the edge of the peritoneum here, so you're looking down. My hand is on the small intestine. This is the proximal rectum. All of these nodules are tumors. There's a couple of tiny ones here that you should be able to see even from the back. This is probably about 40 different tumors, and they're sort of keeping the rectum, the distal rectum, and the bladder from being free. And having to resect all that in the peritoneum is an important part of the procedure. This is looking up at the right diaphragm, looks very similar to the 12-year-old that I had at St. Jude. And there's a carpet of tumors here. My hand is on the liver, and you can see up there that this looks like it's completely stuck to the diaphragm. This is another patient that has this is a DeBakey forceps, so these are 1-2 millimeter lesions on the peritoneum of the small intestine. And you can see that I have the forceps lifting up the peritoneum, and those nodules in the foreground are purplish because I've separated it from the blood supply. And I went on to take out all the tumors that you see in that image by doing a peritonectomy on the small intestine. And that's just a picture of the tumors in the omentum in a patient that only had omental disease. But trying to get that diaphragm tumor out without taking out the diaphragm was something else that required some level of attention to detail. Here is the abdominal wall with the umbilicus is here under the retractor, and this is the edge of the rectus, this is the liver, this is the central tendon of the diaphragm. And so you lift up this peritoneum until you have just a sheet of tumors without any diaphragmatic muscle and just the tumors, and that takes a couple hours to do. And this is the other image from the CT scan that I showed you before, where there was that tumor that was wedged between the bladder and the rectum. Here's the actual tumor and the peritoneum that I took out in one piece. So this is the peritoneum on the bladder side, this is the right and left pelvis, and you can see the very large tumor, and the bladder and the rectum are still in the patient. And what that can look like at the end of the procedure, this is a different patient, but just to show you the level of detail, this is not a debulking surgery, this is a peritonectomy, and this patient, the feet are at the top, the head's at the bottom, it's a midline incision, this clamp is on the bladder, this is the left vas deferens, this is the right, this is a ureter, this is the external and internal iliac artery bifurcation, this is the surface of the rectum, and that's the seminal vesicles. So this dissection of removing basically the whole pouch of Douglas and leaving all those organs and structures intact is the part of the procedure that really leads to the best outcome, being able to get a complete resection. And so just briefly, this DSRCT, there's about 95 cases reported in the entire SEER database over 20 years. Most of the patients are male, and most of them are median age of 18. The survival is approximately 15% before I started working on the disease, and 90% of the patients have some sort of metastasis. They never just have one lump and one tumor. Described in 1989, has a Ewing and a Wilms sarcoma fusion protein. And this is what I find interesting is when I started asking questions. So as you start going through your career, you need to ask questions that may seem obvious, but what are the cells in this disease? We know it's malignant. If you look at these cells here, you see that there are small round blue cells that have high mitotic activity, but then there's this desmoplastic component that interdigitates between the two. So what happens is that the chemotherapy eliminates these mitotic cells, and the desmoplastic stroma remains, and those are the white nodules that you saw in the other images. I started taking pieces of tissue from my patient, looking at them under the microscope before and after chemotherapy to understand if that was true, and indeed it is, and all these sort of pink spaces are all the dead tumor after the chemotherapy. But then I began to wonder, what is in that peritoneum that are next to those nodules? Is the tumor actually coming from the peritoneum, or is it coming down on top of the peritoneum and growing in? So I looked at the adjacent peritoneum next to the tumor nodules and saw that they indeed also had inflammatory and tumor cells. And then the very logical next question was, what about the peritoneum that doesn't have visible tumor in it? And if you look at this peritoneum, you'll see that there was no visible tumor, but microscopically, there's, again, inflammatory cells as well as malignant tumor cells. So that answered the question to me why all the patients have relapse in their abdomen, because even though the surgeons thought they were taking out most of the disease or all of the disease, you leave these microscopic cells behind because you cannot take out 100% of the peritoneum. It's impossible. So that's where the HIPEC comes in. You have to use hyperthermic intraperitoneal chemotherapy to kill those microscopic cells that are in the peritoneum, and that's what provides the long-term survival and outcome, in addition to the complete surgical resection. And this is just a schematic for those who've never seen it. The residents and the audience, that this is just distend the abdomen, do this for 90 minutes, put the cisplatin in there. But remember, this was a first-in-human trial. When you have a first-in-human trial in children, I was told if one patient died on the phase 1 trial that we would never be able to do it again. So the decisions on how to design the human trial were very important. I had to find a drug that had no local peritoneal toxicity, no cross-resistance to any other drugs. I chose cisplatin because it had a neutralizing agent, sodium thiosulfate, that could be used intravenously. And the hyperthermia synergizes with these chemotherapy drugs and causes the cytotoxicity. And the other drugs I had to choose from, are written down at the bottom of the slide, have a higher toxicity profile. So I literally had to guess which one of these drugs is going to work. And it turned out that cisplatin was safe and it also worked. Here's another patient who came along in the middle of the phase 1 trial. So this is a PET scan, so all of these black dots are tumors. This was a 2.5-year-old girl. The pediatric oncologist came to me very sheepishly and said, "I'm sorry to bother you. I know that this is an unresectable tumor, but I have done everything for this child. I'm about to send them out on hospice, and they're insisting to speak with a surgeon." And I said, "Well, actually, we have this new clinical trial. Maybe we could try it on her." She had actually parenchymal liver mets. That's hard to tell here, but in the CT scan, you can see she had parenchymal liver mets. She had everything in this image as tumor except for her bladder. And so we enrolled her on the trial and were able to get a complete cytoreduction. This is her PET scan after the surgery with just the normal kidneys and bladder. And I lost track of her when she got into middle school. This is another patient, 13-year-old boy with, as you can see, a huge tumor. And that technique that I taught myself with the pelvic dissection came in handy here because this is the only disease he had. There were no metastases. There was just this one lump in his abdomen. Obviously, he couldn't breathe and had to be ventilated. And this was actually after chemotherapy. So after all day in the OR, we're able to get this whole tumor out on block and left a wound vac in place to go back the next day to close it. And this is the dissection. So the midline incision is going this way, so the feet are to your left, the head's to your right. This is the transected rectum. This is the right ureter. This is the left ureter. As you can see by the size of the tumor, the urologist was not able to get stents up. This is the transected sigmoid colon. And so the tumor just lifted right out of the pelvis with a little bit of the sigmoid colon. And this was after I had been doing the technique for several years and was able to get a complete resection in this boy. These tumors also can happen as ovarian tumors in adolescent girls. This is a case I did in Kenya, presented lots of challenges doing surgery in Kenya that I can tell you about at another time, but we're able to get a complete resection in this young girl, and we're able to return her back to her village without that large mass in her abdomen after this was her 3rd surgery. So just a little bit about doing a phase 1 trial and how designing it, especially in a vulnerable population of children, can be challenging. I chose to do it with 10 patients in dose escalation. I've done over 230 cases in my career of HIPEC, but these are the first 27. And we had to take all comers for histology purposes because we didn't know in which patients it was going to work. We didn't know which histology was going to be effective. I was hoping it was going to be effective for DSRCT, but I didn't know. And we had to obviously carefully monitor the toxicity. The goal was to get 100 milligrams per meter squared up to 250 milligrams per meter squared, but we had renal toxicity that limited that and had to de-escalate from 150 milligrams per meter squared. There was a couple dozen children in this cohort. The operation time at this time was about 15 hours. The longest surgery I've done is about 22 hours and resected over 2,000 tumors. And this cohort, the hospital stay was about 10 days. It's about 10 to 14 days. The quality of life study, which I don't have time to show, but just shows that at about 30 to 60 days, they get back to normal. I have pictures of some of my patients running marathons, and so they do recover, as children do, very well from complex surgeries. The dose-limiting toxicity was grade 3 renal failure, and about 5 of the patients had some sort of renal failure. 3 ended up on dialysis. I had to shut the protocol down. I had to do a whole evaluation to figure out what was going on. I redid my preoperative and intraoperative and postoperative fluid protocol in order to not have any of that happen again. So that was also another challenge in the development of something new. In this cohort, and since, I've had no perioperative mortality. There has been, before we instituted the hyperhydration, there was some increase in creatinine. There's one patient who had a cardiomyopathy because we removed over 1 kilo of tumor, and I learned to do some beta blockade prior to those cases, and then partial small bowel obstruction from adhesions. I've had no post-op bleeding or take-backs to the operating room in this series or since then for the HIPEC cases. And here's another challenge. I'm a new assistant professor at MD Anderson. I'm at the MD Anderson Cancer Center, and I'm telling them that they're doing everything wrong with this tumor, that they're not doing what needs to be done to make any cure. So I had to show them with data that it was working. So I arrived at MD Anderson in 2004. These are the patients I took care of from 2004 to 2010, and even in that short time period, I was able to raise the survival from 10% to about 50%. This was an article that really was the beginning of the realization of a dream that was published in the Houston Woman magazine, and going from just an idea to the HIPEC. And the first cohort of patients that I published in 2013 showed that if you did the complete resection, as I showed you, and the HIPEC, that the median survival went from 26 months to 6 through 3 months, and that was most certainly clinically, statistically significant. So now by this time, after I published this, between this and trying to show that the procedure is effective, I received lots of invitations to teach the teach the procedure to other surgeons, and during that time was conducting the phase 2 trial. The youngest patient I've done HIPEC on is 22 months. We used the cisplatin for 90 minutes at 41 degrees. I learned I had to exclude patients that had disease outside the abdominal cavity and poor performance status or any organ dysfunction. And this is, or the patients who could not receive a complete surgical resection. There was 14 DSRCT patients in this study, and every patient received Ewing-type chemotherapy, followed by surgery, HIPEC, whole radiation therapy, chemotherapy, and surveillance. We didn't reach a median survival for the DSRCT patients because the 1-year survival was 93%, but it was only 67% for all the other patients. And here's a Kaplan-Meier curve showing for all comers. But this was the important part of the study, which really changed how we treat DSRCT today. There's an 80% survival at 30 months for the DSRCT patients versus 15 months for all other patients. And if you look at the disease-free survival, you also see that out to 30 months that they live much longer than the other patients who just didn't respond to the cisplatin HIPEC. When you follow these out a little longer, as is 30 months, you go to 50 months, you do see some relapse in the mediastinum and other areas. I've not seen any relapse in the abdomen itself, sometimes in the retroperitoneum, in the lymph nodes, or in the lungs after HIPEC. So this really got me motivated to get back in the lab. So remember, with every single one of these patients, I'm taking tissue, taking it to my lab, trying to understand how does this tumor grow, how does it spread, where does it start, why is it only in boys and men? And so in understanding that, I thought, well, maybe hormones drive the growth of this tumor. So I looked at the hormones, the androgen receptor in particular, and this is the DSRCT. This is a Ewing sarcoma cell line. This is a prostate cancer cell line. And it just shows that androgen receptor expression is prevalent in the DSRCT and the prostate cancer. And it kind of mimics prostate cancer in that expression. So this just shows the androgen receptor positivity. That's the same staining in this DSRCT as the prostate cancer cell line. Then if you add testosterone to the cells, they grow. If you add dihydrotestosterone, they also grow. But the Ewing sarcoma cells, remember this is a combination between a Ewing and a Wilms tumor, the Ewing sarcoma cells do not grow in response to testosterone or dihydrotestosterone. But the growth is mimicked between prostate cancer and this tumor. So this came even more questions. So the initial question was, why, what does it start and why is it only in boys? So anytime you're studying a cancer, you have to figure out how, or any other disease for that matter, a mouse model is helpful. You can't have an orthotopic xenograft model if you don't know where the tumor starts. So, these are the models that we use. If there's a liver cancer, we put the tumor cells back in the liver. Breast cancer, they go back in the breast of a mouse. But trying to develop this mouse model was extraordinarily challenging. Now, I made an observation, and I showed you in an initial image that I'm cutting tumor off of the seminal vesicles, so that my mind said, okay, we're cutting tumor off of the seminal vesicles. That must mean that there's something driving the growth of this tumor, the reason it's always stuck, and I'm always spending 4 or 5 hours dissecting in the pelvis. So this is a non-skid gamma mouse. This is an injection into the perigonadal region with DSRCT cells, and I was able to get, when doing the injection this way, to mimic exactly the growth in human tumors. These are the mice at 2 million cells and 5 million cells injected, and this is the necropsy that shows, this is a liver, and these little white dots are all tumors intraperitoneally of the mouse, as well as on the testicle and the seminiferous tubules of the mouse. And so it really did mimic the disease, including abdominal metastases around the pancreas and supraclavicular lymph node metastases. So I learned that there's overlapping pathways with androgens, and they're behaving more like sarcomas, but I still didn't understand what type of tumor this was. So remember, we talked about the fact that we don't know what it comes from. So we looked at fat, lung, muscle, and skin. And the red dots are all the patients with DSRCT. Each dot is a different patient. And it doesn't cluster with any of those. And then you look at other sarcomas using whole genome sequencing, and you see that it doesn't cluster with any other sarcomas. The red dots are over here. I published this one from data that I generated at MD Anderson in 2022, and it's not like chondrosarcoma, liposarcoma, or any of those others. And then I thought, well, maybe we can find a common gene for all DSRCT tumors. This is 4 different patients, and they all have a EWSWT1 commonality, but unfortunately none others. The allelic trees are different, and it's immune cold. Then we use single-cell sequencing to try to figure out more about this group. We found a mesenchymal stem cell group here in this. So the single-cell sequencing, you take a lump of tumor, you break it into pieces, and it tells you which type of cells make up that one lump of tumor. And you can see here that the androgen receptor and its SOX2 and EpCAM share expression, so it's probably a stem cell. I'm not going to go through all this data, but to show you that using that technique, we're able to get a large amount of data and identify that not only androgen receptor, but maybe PDGF alpha and GJB2 are involved. So the last thing I want to mention about this before I talk about the journey here in ABSA is we published this in Nature in 2022, myself and my laboratory associate, Joe Ludwig, when we're trying to look at the DSRCT samples and look for any protein overexpression compared to Ewing, and we didn't find a unique androgen receptor-dependent protein expression like we thought. But when we used the antisense that Joe developed an antisense to androgen receptor, and we treated the mice with those, that we saw a significant effect. So this left-hand column is the orthotopic xenograft model. The right-hand column are the patient-derived grafts. And these are black and gray lines are the control mice. And the other lines are, this yellow line is enzalutamide treatment, which is what is used for prostate cancer. And the orange line is the antisense to androgen receptor. And you can see in this bottom panel that the orange line in the survival curve is 100% survival of the mice when they were treated with this androgen receptor. So to sum up my career in laboratory research, it's really possible to go from bench to bedside. This is the green at Howard University in the background. And you can focus on one disease and make a significant impact. And I want to encourage the young people in the audience that this is indeed possible. And this is also, this journey really is the impetus for me in trying to want to be an advocate and change the lives of more than one person. And this is how I chose advocacy as a theme, here at this time in ABSA. And it's really because I wanted to understand how to make more of a difference than just in one child, but how we can make more of a difference in many children. And there are certain pieces of information that we need despite this vast network, and it was these experiences that really inspired me to focus on advocacy. If we don't know what we need from our senators and congresswomen and congressmen, governors and presidents, we will be surprised by the changes that come, and we don't want to be surprised. We want to have a perspective on pediatric health that's held by no other surgeons, and we must use our voice. These are some of the things that pediatric surgeons should be thinking about when they think about advocacy: Medicaid, rural care, violence prevention, healthcare disparities, and access to care. You've seen during this meeting that we have abstracts on all of these things, but we tend to keep it in this room amongst ourselves, and we really need to project out what we know so that we can change the lives of children. I'm going to give just a couple of examples. Then you all know about the Medicaid spending cuts that are being enacted currently. And we need to understand more about how that's going to affect our children and our freestanding children's hospitals, as well as the smaller children's hospitals. We need to be able to advocate for improving Medicaid eligibility. We have to understand what is going to happen when the states split this cost of Medicaid and start using provider taxes to reduce general fund spending, and how providers tend to get more back in Medicaid reimbursements than they actually pay. In the case of state-directed Medicaid payments, as you know, states get waivers that allow them to tell health insurance companies what Medicaid contracts and how much to pay providers. And I imagine that some of this information is new for many of you in the audience. But ultimately, this is an expert, Dr. Park, that makes the point that we've got to make sure providers are paid well enough to be able and willing to serve Medicaid patients. What we're seeing now is an increased number of self-pay patients. We know that children are going to arrive to the hospital sicker because they're not going to have Medicaid insurance, and we might experience increase in mortalities, and we have to be ready for that, and we have to keep alerting our leaders that this is a possibility so it can be avoided. There are some efforts by the American College of Surgeons that are ongoing that I think ABSA should get involved with, which is a Pediatric Device Consortia grant that some of your children's hospitals are involved with, an Emergency Medical Services for Children's bill, which provides funding to ensure that hospitals have ambulance and proper equipment for children. That's right up our alley. You know how frustrated you are when you go to another hospital and they don't have the instruments, or they don't have what they need to intubate a baby. There's another act called the Ensuring Lasting Smiles Act that requires private group or individual health plans to cover congenital diseases. So we need to know about these bills and be able to talk to our senators and congressmen about them. This is a snapshot from the CHOP website. They have a Pediatric Device Consortia grant program. It would be nice to look at this site or others and have an ABSA symbol next to it showing that ABSA supports something like this. I think that's very positive for the public. The Virginia, this is a snapshot from my state of Virginia, the Emergency Medical Services for Children. They do have that in the state of Virginia, although nationally it's not in every single state. You should know what you have in your state. This is one of the things that we can easily have our voices heard. So later on this afternoon, there's an advocacy panel, and that was what my desire was, to really expose all of you to advocacy. So please come to the panel at 2:15. We've been able to develop a subcommittee of the advocacy committee. So the advocacy committee now has a subcommittee that's going to be responsive to these issues and should be sending out every other week information in the upcoming months about bills like the ones I've just shown you. So the advocacy committee now has a subcommittee who is also, the Board of Governors voted to invest money in sending a pediatric surgeon from the AAP to both the American College of Surgeons Advocacy Annual Meeting and the AAP Advocacy Meeting. And that will allow that person to come back, communicate to us what these bills and opportunities are, and really inform us about state level issues as well. The other new effort that we have is this advocacy podcast. And Dr. Leslie Nod, I want to thank her for bringing this to the Board of Governors. We invested in this new podcast, and I was the first person interviewed, so I'm going to play 2 minutes of the podcast.
Welcome to the Operation Advocacy Podcast, improving the lives of children through simple conversations, a podcast produced by pediatric surgeons. Participants in this podcast are not speaking on behalf of any organization, society, or institution with which they may be affiliated. Comments and views shared are independently their own. On today's podcast,
My name is Andrea Hayes Dixon. Educating the public to protect children is really critical to me.
welcome to Operation Advocacy. This is our debut podcast produced by pediatric surgeons with a mission to improve the lives of children through simple conversations. This idea was developed many months ago with a small group of pediatric surgeons on our Pediatric Surgery Society's Health Policy and Advocacy Committee. I'm Dr. Leslie Nod, and on today's podcast, we are joined by Dr. Andrea Hayes Dixon. She is the Dean of Howard University's College of Medicine, Senior Vice President of the Health Affairs, and former Surgeon-in-Chief and Division Chief of Pediatric Surgery at UNC Children's Hospital, and a previous Section Chief at the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center. Welcome, Dr. Hayes Dixon. Thank you for joining us for this podcast.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Nod. I'm very pleased to be here.
Today, I wanted to ask you, as your presidency in American Pediatric Surgery Association, your focus was educating the public to protect children. What led that vision for advocacy as the cornerstone of your presidency?
Yeah, so educating the public to protect children is really critical to me. Protecting our children is something that's often neglected. If you look at our policies and procedures from the United States of America through either HHS or the Secretary of Health, you do not find a lot of policies, very, very few, that are directly related to children. And even just looking at public media, public television, other cable stations, you really don't see pediatric health represented. And I'm not sure why that is, but I think as pediatric surgeons, we have a responsibility to provide that education. I often think of the education as being very basic and not necessarily complex, meaning, for example, you and I both know that one of the things that we do fairly frequently as pediatric surgeons, and pediatric otolaryngologists do the same, is, for example, removing coins from an esophagus of a small baby who's accidentally swallowed a coin that gets stuck in their esophagus. And just that simple public safety announcement would be helpful if we could get some group to recognize that this is a public safety hazard that could be avoided with simple education. You can hear the rest of the podcast anywhere you get podcasts. You can search for ABSA. That's the first one. Dr. Nod and the team will be putting out more over the year. We also going to have what we call a One Pediatric Surgery Summit. That will be upcoming this year, where we're going to have a meeting that combines the program directors, the PSB, the Pediatric Surgery Board, the APSA, the Pediatric Residency Review Committee, and we need to address some issues that affect all of us. We're experiencing a very high oral board failure rate. When I took the oral boards, there was 1 out of 25 of us who failed, and now that's 4 times what it was 23 years ago. Do we need to align our standards for fellowships? Do we have too many fellowships? Do we have too few fellowships? We really have to stop operating in silos and talk to each other about how to best educate our fellows. The American College of Surgeons started an effort on understanding workplace standards. That spun off from trying to understand if we could unionize. And the decision about unionization was that it really remained so regional that it probably wasn't possible for the college to weigh in that way. But they did just publish a paper on workplace standards, and they published this for general surgery, and we need to develop our own workplace standards. You all know that the nurses either have 1-to-4 nursing or 1-to-7 nursing or 1-to-1 nursing. They have a certain number of patients they can take care of. Emergency room physicians have certain standards. How many patients should we take care of on service if you're in an academic institution? How often should we be on call? How many hospitals should we cover? And if we cover a hospital, can we demand they have a pediatric radiologist or a pediatric anesthesiologist, or should we? So I want you to pay attention, because you are going to get some surveys. I know everybody hates surveys, but we've got to define these workplace standards, and we have to make them so that other hospitals will respect that and will make sure that we don't get burned out and we have an excellent quality of life. So I'll end by some words that I live by. These are words from Winnie the Pooh for anybody that knows. I know my son in the front row knows I talk about this all the time. You are braver than you believe. You are stronger than you seem. You are smarter than you think, and you are loved more than you'll ever know. I think my experiences give me perspective. My perspective gives me vision. My friends protect my blind spots, and God lights the path. My family is the one that keeps me moving forward. And I think the keys to success are these 4 Ps, and these are up in the College of Medicine at Howard. All my students see them every day when they come in. Patience, passion, perseverance, and prayer. I think if you can have patience with yourself when you don't have the best outcome in your patients and you can be in the middle of a 750-gram baby and you can't find the other end of the small bowel, because the necrotizing enterocolitis is so bad, you have to have patience with yourself. You have to have passion for what you do every single day, because it's hard to get up and do what we do every day with the vulnerable population that we have. And keeping that passion going is what drives us to get up at 5:30 in the morning. Perseverance, just getting over the hurdles of mistakes that we all make in practice and in otherwise, and knowing that you have to persevere. And prayer to whatever the God is that you pray to, but to acknowledge that there's something bigger than you out there that guides how your life goes. So I thank you for your attention, and thank you so much for allowing me to be your president this year.